And good evening to those of you from around the world that are joining us for this VS series as a webinar as Exciters webinar. I'm Chuck Kelly here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and more accurately Hackett's Cove. And sitting to my right is to my left is Jeff Welton, Midwest Sales Manager. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Chuck.
So, and I also would like to just mention here that Jeff has a long and distinguished career here at Nautel, including a bunch of years on the customer service side of things. So many of you may know Jeff, having answered some of your customer service questions in a prior life.
I think about 17 years in that seat.
So glad to have you with me, Jeff. We'd like to talk about the VS series as an exciter. I should mention also that there seems to be an awful lot of interest in this. We have 170 people signed up for this webinar. We're delighted with that. So we're going to go through the following things: the VS series concept as a product. Not going to spend a lot of time because there are webinars that are completely on that subject. Using the VS series as an exciter, specifics, the VS series as an exciter examples. We have a special guest with us today, Alex Hartman from Minnesota. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
Okay, and then we're going to talk about some tips and tricks. For those of you who don't know, in our newsletter that we send out at Nautel, the Nautel Waves newsletter, Jeff writes a regular article on tips and tricks, and it's always the most popular article in our newsletter. So if you don't get the newsletter, I'll tell you later on in the webinar how to sign up for it. Then we're going to talk specifically about using the VS and HD radio mode as an exciter, the VSD for synchronous FM or boosters, synchronous boosters as an exciter, and the VS and push radio use, and we'll explain that very briefly as an exciter. And then we're going to take your questions. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a place for you to type questions. Feel free to enter those questions in at any time, and near the end of the webinar, we will be answering your questions. So do write those in, and we'll try to answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, we will answer it via email offline afterwards. So first thing we want to talk about is what is the VS series and how much stuff do we have crammed in these little tiny inexpensive boxes. So first off, they're a digital exciter with everything that comes along with that, the audio performance, AES EBU inputs. It is a fully digital exciter. Not too many years ago, that type of exciter, whether it came from us or from some of our esteemed competition, was over $10,000 just by itself. And then we have a broad range of audio inputs from the IP standpoint. Things like Livewire, Shoutcast, and Icecast. This thing can actually go out and bring in streaming broadcasts as a backup to the on-air signal. And it's also a full Axia Livewire device, so it can just sit right on the network and be a Livewire destination. The transmitter already has in it built in all the stuff that you need for SFMs. So GPS synchronization of all the bits of the signal, as well as a adjustable micro delay, is already built into the transmitter. These transmitters are compatible or upgradable to HD radio or DRM use, and they make use of the entire AUI control system that is out now on most all the transmitters that Nautel has. They also have the capability of having a built-in playout generator that works off of files that you've stored on an external USB memory stick or USB hard drive. And they come equipped with the 4-year Nautel warranty, which is now standard on our AM and FM transmitters. So let's talk about specifically about the VS series as an exciter replacement. It's the VS300 is up to 300 watts, and it's priced at a bargain price of $52.50. The VS1 will go up to 1,400 watts and just $8,400. And bear in mind that the reason very few people have a 1,400 watt exciter. Purpose of this is that you may choose to replace the IPA of your transmitter at the same time as you're replacing the exciter. It doesn't cost much more, and it can get rid of a lot of maintenance headaches and even some Jeff, there's a lot of situations in which the IPA is the limiting factor for bandwidth, and thus it causes effects with regard to stereo performance and AM noise.
Yep, correct.
So we can get rid of those. For instance, some old transmitters have tube-type IPAs, and this can actually just replace that as well. And we'll talk about all this. And the 2.5 can go up to 2,800 watts, and it's just 15,750. And again, you can replace the IPA with that. Now, one of the things that we did in the design process of the VS series, the design process, is that we included a DC blocking capacitor so that no DC can come in the back of the rig, and we put a DC short to ground at the output as well, which eliminates the chance of a screen or grid short inside the tube shooting a high voltage spike backwards into your transmitter and damaging the VS power amplifier. We also have flexible logic design and can provide contact closures for transmitters that need a PLL lock, interlock, and input control for exciter mute signals that older transmitters typically require. Jeff, would you like to talk about how we specifically implement the VS in the NV series?
Well, sure. I mean, the NV series have an integral exciter. In a pinch, you can pull it out and run a high-power transmitter or a low-power transmitter or high-power exciter into it of any make. The VS series, it's simply a matter of connecting the audio. It says on the slide you may need a distribution amp if you're running more than one. The power supply will have to be correct for the AC source to the VS transmitter because you will either need a step-up transformer or 220 volts, whereas your original exciter may have been 110. And then you just need a coax cable to connect it and wire up the muting. That's pretty much all there is for that.
One thing we should mention here is this is the NV, not the NV Lite. The NV Lite can't be handled this way.
Correct. That is exactly correct.
Okay.
So there's a very rudimentary schematic of what you would do if you were putting a VS exciter or, as I said, anything to drive an NV series transmitter. It's pretty rudimentary. You've got your remote mute wiring, and then you've got your coax, and that's about all there is to it.
Very good. And then?
The procedure for it, and you've got your drive levels. As I said, you can see for 15, 20, 30, and 40 kilowatt transmitters, you need more than well over 50 watts of drive power, so a stock 50-watt unit wouldn't do it, but the 300 works quite nicely for this.
So right, all the VS 300 will handle any of these transmitters in terms of drive capability.
That's right. The 300's got a minimum output power level of 8 watts, so it will handle anything down to 3.5 kilowatt transmitter.
Right. Okay.
Okay, there's a rudimentary procedure here. I'm not going to beat over it too much. The webinar will be available on our website later, so you can certainly go through and read the step-by-step instructions. And a lot of these procedures will be the same no matter what transmitter you're driving. Most transmitters require a mute from the exciter, and you definitely need to have it connected if your transmitter, especially if you're using a tube transmitter with plate inhibits on it, then you'll want to wire the exciter mute up for sure.
Yeah, you don't want to put drive into a tube without PA voltage, right?
Hollow state technology doesn't like that
That's
stuff.
not a good idea for those glass fence.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we move into non-Nautel transmitters, one of the things we should mention is that where we're providing you information about what people have told us about how they've modified their transmitters, we're not in any position to be able to give you specific instructions or warrant the performance of our transmitter to somebody else's exciter.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can certainly tell you how other folks have done it. Some of them have documented it really well. As an example, our friends at Town Square Media have sent us very detailed documentation on putting VS transmitters as drivers into the Continental 816 series, detailed to the point of having photographs and step-by-step instructions. From these things we've picked up from our customers, we've learned several things. Number one, all tubes don't have 50 ohm inputs necessarily.
That's right.
So you do need to know your final amplifier input impedance.
And you need to find a way to get that input impedance to 50 ohms if the VS is going to be driving it.
Well, exactly. And in the case of the 816 I was mentioning earlier, the folks at Continental have obviously on the older 816s implemented a field mod for installing solid-state IPA to it, which does transform you to a 50 ohm input. So that field mod gives you everything you need to set up the platform for installing a VS system to drive that transmitter.
Perfect. And I should say that most of the FM transmitters, tube-type FM transmitters or solid-state FM transmitters that I've run into in the industry had a place where you could feed 50 ohms into the grid circuit.
Yeah, at some point. The grounded grid are a little more of a catch to them, and you may need some swamping or transform impedance adjustments.
Okay. So then you set up the muting so that when played on is on, that's when the transmitter, the exciter is enabled.
That's right. And Alex is going to get into this a little as well, because I know he ran into a situation. I want to have him describe it rather than me, so we'll touch on that again later.
Okay.
And the other thing is airflow. In a lot of cases, you're best to leave the original equipment in place because it can disrupt the airflow to your final, and tubes don't like to be that hot. Not any more so than anything else. Plus, you can, by removing those items, you can actually, depending on where your pressure sensors are located for airflow sensors, you could actually end up having an issue of airflow alarms.
Okay. Very good.
All right. Now, the other things to remember, obviously, you need to know if you're replacing just the exciter or the exciter and the IPA. In some cases, if you're replacing the driver stage to a tube rig, you may need in excess of 300 watts. So it may be an argument for a VS1 over a VS300. If you need less than 8 watts, and I have run into that before where we only needed 3 or 4 watts of drive, then you may need an external attenuator.
Right.
And again, with the muting, do you need normally open or normally closed? It's just a matter of what wires you connect. We provide both options with the VS series systems.
And it's even definable in the AUI, as I recall.
I believe it is, yeah.
Okay.
All right, and this is something else that Alex may elaborate on, but remember that if you're doing this to an older transmitter, the wiring insulation will get brittle. And if you move it around, it is going to crack and fall off, and you may have to replace some coax here and there.
Okay. And I like your idea here, Jeff, about using a coaxial relay to bypass the transmitter itself in the case that you want to put the exciter directly there.
It gives you a short and easy way to get yourself a fairly high power backup. I mean, 1 kilowatt into an antenna will go almost as far as 10 kilowatts.
People are always surprised with how far a lower power exciter or lower power transmitter will go. You may not get that last 10% of your coverage in terms of, but it's going to make a huge difference, as opposed to being off the air.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the BEC series.
Okay, and this is just an example, and again, this is a situation where a customer did it, and we had the information from BE on some of the things that had to be done for it. The advantage of having the Quincy office is some of the support guys will collaborate a little here and there. And it's just basically the only real thing you need to look at on the BE series is pull-up resistor to pull up the on commands when they're not actually being active.
Right. Okay, very good. Let's talk about some specifics.
Okay, these are specific systems we've had done. The first one is a VS300 driving a Crown amplifier.
Which was actually made by RVR, it looks like. Oh, no, the RVR is the exciter it replaced. Okay,
yeah. The second one is one of our friends from Town Square, again, sent us in the modify, and you'll notice that they've actually installed a VS1 transmitter into the 816, and then in lieu of rear rail support, done some customized 2x4 work to hold the end of the transmitter.
They've done several of these, as I understand.
At last count, they've done 4 or 5 to the 816s, as well as 3 or 4 to other mix of transmitter as well.
And you know, one of the benefits that you get, aside from the AUI and all the other cool things you can do with the VS series, when you talk about a transmitter that may be 20 years old, the audio quality of the exciters of that ilk wasn't all that great.
Exactly.
And you can come in and make a huge difference in the performance of your station just by upgrading the exciter.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay.
All right. And again, there's an example. I don't have the details on the FM32. I'll confess I pulled it off a Facebook page about transmitter sites, but that's definitely VS300 sitting in that transmitter.
In this case, it doesn't look like they bypassed the IPA, which is down here below. So they're running the exciter, the 300, into the IPA, which is then driving the tube.
That's right. It's just being used as an exciter only. And the bottom one is Alex's station, one of Alex's stations rather, where it's a VS1 in the right-hand rack, replacing both the exciter and the IPA into an FM25K. And we'll let Alex discuss that one.
Why don't we let him, well, we got the photo up. Why don't we let him discuss it now? Alex, tell us about the FM25K replacement.
Well, that one was a very interesting, fun one. Everybody knows the FM25K has those goofy 5 IPA stacks in them that Harris was notorious for not stocking a lot of parts for, and they had a mod kit. And they've started to become unobtainium, and when you can find them, they are horribly more expensive than buying a VS1, for instance.
Yeah.
So we ended up bypassing everything, and we went straight with the VS1 right into the PA with this unit. Actually making the FM25K more efficient because the old IPA stack was just that old and inefficient.
And you were also mentioning some changes in audio quality on it.
Audio quality went through the roof when we got rid of the FX30. Obviously, 30-year-old exciter has 30-year-old technology in it. So the sound quality dramatically improved. We no longer needed the composite clipper in front of it. We were running an Omnia processor in front of it, so it's just the sound quality went way up, and the making the transmitter actually pass mask. We didn't have to fudge anything anymore. The exciter was keeping it all in check for us.
Alex,
Again, back to what Jeff mentioned.
Go ahead.
Back to what Jeff mentioned, however, this is one of the cases where we had to leave the original IPA in place due to airflow sensors.
Alex, how critical was the grid tuning to making the VS happy?
Not very. It wasn't terribly difficult. The grid just came right up and said, "Oh, hi, look at you. You're pretty. I like you." It just turned right on. Like I said, it made the transmitter more efficient overall. Once the exciter in the IPA was pushing about 318 watts into the final. Right now, when we put the VS1 in there, we only needed 290 watts of drive.
And the reason for going with a 1 kilowatt over a 300 watt was?
Like I said, the final wanted 318 into it, so we went based on that spec, and we don't like to push things hard. Sure. So we had the VS1, and the argument there again was, since we were up against that wall, again, it's another one of those situations where we decided to put a coaxial switch in, and we can bypass the Harris and put the Nautel directly into an 8-bay antenna.
And you could set up a preset so that instead of 295 watts drive, it goes to full 1400 or something. And
yep, and we have that exactly thing set up on the remote control that we can just dial into it and go. I don't have IP out of this site yet, but I will in about 2 months.
Okay, great. Very good.
And on the caveats and catches thing, I believe when you were doing this, you did have a couple of timing issues with the muting?
Timing is everything, as they say. The biggest problem we ran into was that the Harris likes to go into a recycle state on low RF drive because it assumes there's something wrong with the exciter or the IPAs. So the VS series has a ramp-up time from the time you press RF on to the time it actually makes power. So we had to kind of do a little bit of midnight engineering on how that actually works. When you press filament on, it turns on the VS1 at its lowest power setting, which I believe is 32 watts. And as Jeff is famous for telling me, it'll run into a coat hanger at 32 watts. So we have that on and filament on. Yes, we do get a little bit of, the VisWar does spike and it still runs, but as soon as you press plate on, then it ramps up. If we were to just have it turn on at the time when you press plate on, the ramp-up time is too high for it to start sending drive into the final before the transmitter says, uh-oh, and shuts itself down.
Fair enough. Okay. Did you notice any difference in, or did you measure synchronous AM noise?
We did measure, and it went down dramatically, actually.
So that should help your stereo performance.
It dramatically helped the stereo performance. Believe it or not, it actually helped with multipath, too.
Yeah.
We have a lot of dense, older, 100-year-old brick buildings that we always have multipath issues around, and the most of them cleared up.
Excellent. Thank you for that feedback. We'll come back to you in a minute.
Okay.
So here's another installation where one of our good customers, Fred Francis in West Virginia, installed a VS300 as a replacement exciter for Energionics Eco 20. And his comment is here. VS300 sounded great with the nearly transparent composite clipper turned on. It was loud and the audio quality was much improved. The station was very loud, in fact so much louder the station owner did not believe he was legal. It's got to be fun. So we're glad that that worked out in that installation. So Alex, I should now that we've had a nice chat with you, I should let Jeff introduce you.
Well, everybody, Alex is contract guy up in central Minnesota. He does a whole bunch of stuff. Radio is one of them. He's currently in Oshkosh setting up the official communications booth, if you will, for the EAA Air Show, which I believe is next week, right, Alex?
Yep, starts Sunday.
I put in here, he's a whiz at point-to-point wireless bridges. He's the guy that taught me pretty much everything I know about setting those up. So if I ever steer you wrong, you'll know who to blame. And we've talked about using the VS1. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention on that, Alex, you were one of the guys, as I recall, you're the reason that I have the note in there about coax insulation.
Yes, that FM25K lived the first 20 years of its life on the roof of the Empire State Building in New York City. As such, it has tons and tons of elevator grease that you just cannot get rid of, the graphite stuff. No matter the amount of pressure washing or anything you do, you still open that door and you get your hands full of it. With that being said, graphite also dries out the dielectrics and cables really easily. And when we were putting this all together, we were chasing our toes for the better part of 3.5 hours for a 20-minute job because all of the coax going from the final and jumping around inside of there had gotten so brittle that the connectors started falling off in our hands.
Wow.
And there's a reject load inside the 25K as well that was part of the IPA combiner that we had to leave installed to make the final very happy. So it just comes right back out of the final. And that thing fell apart. It was so brittle you could see straight into the middle of the center of the cable. So we ended up having to chase down 6 or 7 new cables running around inside the box before we could actually get this thing on the air.
So one of the things you don't want to do is get into one of these installations halfway and then find that not only have you broken or not gotten the whole installation done, but you've broken the main transmitter.
Oh yeah, and that's what we ended up with as well. Why is this contactor not working? What's going on here? Why are we having an air interlock all of a sudden? We put the thing back the way we found it to find out what we did wrong. And here it was, is all these RF cables, the pins started coming off because they were so brittle. The cables were falling apart in our hands. And, you know, is a cable that's been bent in a certain direction for 30 years, if you try and move it another direction, it just snaps in half. Yeah. You may not even know it. It's doing it inside the cable. You can't see it.
Alex, any other hints you would give our listeners for upgrading their existing transmitters with a VS series exciter?
There's several good reasons to do this. I don't know if Jeff put it in the presentation, but there was a picture of the trapezoid of the transmitter doing what it does, and it looks spot on. You can breathe new life if you don't have the budget to go and buy a new NV series or you just can't afford it at this time. But the justification is when you can afford it, you end up with a nice VS backup. Yeah. And that's the huge selling point that was to my customers was that, you know, you're buying a 1,000 watt or 1,400 watt exciter, and they kind of went, well, why do I need that much power? And I said, you have a 35-year-old rig we're trying to breathe another 5-6 years into, and we're going to have issues. We're going to have to fix things. So being able to put 1,000 watts into an 8-bay versus 20 watts out of your old exciter, yeah, you're on the air, but a little more power always helps. You know, the old famous saying is, you know, the last 90% of your power gets the last 10% of your listeners.
Right.
Or reverse that. Sorry. The point is you have a very reliable, very portable backup. Perfect example would be down south in Hurricane Alley or you know, Tornado Alley in that area where you can literally lose your tower. Well, here you can just grab the VS1 or 2.5. throw it in the back of the truck, find some power out of a genset, and put an antenna up on a TV mast, and you're back on the air.
That's right.
Try doing that with an FM25K or even an NV series. They're just not that portable.
Yeah, and plus with the VS series, you have in essence a built-in automation where you can use a USB stick or whatever you want to provide content, even if you don't have a working studio.
Well, that and the Orban Inside card, you don't have to lug around your processing either. It's an all-in-one, just go box.
That's right.
One of the other things you'd mentioned, Alex, is just I'm going to borrow a phrase you'd used a couple of minutes ago, breathe new life into an old transmitter. On the FM25K at the HMH, you, as I recall during the install time, specifically mentioned something about the output power on it.
Yes. Like I said, it got a little more efficient and everything went happier. The transmitter's starting to idle. It's not pushing as hard as it had to before. So, everybody knows that at certain points transmitters like to retire. And this one is still a main service duty, but it's not working nearly as hard as in its old age. The day we actually put the VIA in there was its 30th birthday.
Wow. That's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Jeff, you want to move into tips and tricks mode?
Sure. There's just a couple of things, and this is I should be getting a commission from these guys too, because I mean, holy smokes, I think I sell more of these than anything else. If you've got to do not just a VS as an exciter into another transmitter, but anytime you're doing anything where you've got DB series connectors, these little slimline units from Winford Engineering just, I mean, they really make it easier, giving you a Phoenix breakout and just make it so much easier to connect stuff.
And that's applicable to most of our transmitters.
That's right. And Winford's a Michigan company too, so they're fairly local to the U.S., little family-owned group.
Okay.
Here's something, like Alex had mentioned about coax not liking to bend after it's been the same way for 30 years. Coax also just in general doesn't like to bend at all. So a lot of times when you've got a long transmitter like the VS series, they are fairly long, it's easier rather than running a piece of coax out and making a 2-foot bend radius with 1 5/8 coax to put an elbow on it. In that case, we can provide the transmitters with DIN connectors, and a DIN connector will save you a whole bunch of money over using an EIA flange. In addition, the DIN connectors are a whole lot more flexible. I mean, you can hand tighten the thing onto the back of the transmitter.
And they're dead easy to put on.
Oh, yeah.
For those of you who have not installed a DIN connector. Okay?
Yep. There's just some pricing comparison here. If I had to do a jumper cable assembly with 7/8 CIA flange versus 7/16 DIN using half-inch cable in both cases. And you can see, I mean, you're a quarter of the price using the DIN connector.
That's right. And there's a DIN connector.
That's what it looks like. I mean, it's a screw-on connector. You just plug the cable on. You can actually buy a right-angle connector that goes directly onto your coax, so you don't even have to do an elbow and another connector. So
makes it very clean.
And the fewer joints you have, the less there is to fail.
And if you get the VS HD, all these VS transmitters are capable of doing HD, so it is possible for you to actually use it as an HD exciter.
You can go a step further than that. You could have, in a situation where you needed it as a higher power backup, you could run it in HD to drive the main, or to be in one way, and then switch it to analog only for backup on another preset.
That's right. And because the VS series has integrally the GPS, it can be locked to GPS, and that locks not only the carrier frequency, but also all of the pilot and SCA and all that sort of thing. And it also includes a micro-adjust delay. It has all the bits and pieces you need to do an SFN or booster situation, and you can lay out this thing. If you want more details on how to do an SFN, we have a wonderful webinar just on this subject, and we actually had one of our design engineers in here, and Phil was able to add a lot of information about how these SFNs work in their digital conditions, which is fascinating. And the idea of push radio, where all the content is actually pushed out to the transmitter site, and then the VS exciter acts as a playout engine and plays the content off the hard drive. This is actually something that we've done in cooperation with ENCO. So they've got a piece of software at ENCO, the DAD system, that actually, instead of talking to sound cards, is talking to VS transmitters and making sure they have all the content on their local storage drives, making sure that the playlists are up to date, and then dragging back the AS plays lists so that they can be reconciled with traffic and billing and music scheduling at the studio. So this isn't for everybody. This is primarily for educational broadcasters, digicasters that are characterized by having a lot of transmitters distributed over a large geographic range, and that typically are using satellite for distribution. And so this can save a lot of money in those satellite distribution costs and provide localism at the transmitters. So to summarize, using the VS as an exciter, don't forget to consider the details such as plate interlocks and system controllers. If you're also replacing the IPA stage, or even if you're not, make sure that the VS is going to be driving 50 ohms plus or minus J0. And that's quite important. The transmitter will complain if you don't do that. That won't blow up, but it'll complain. And it may be valuable to consider adding a low-power coaxial switching controller to allow switching the VS transmitter directly to the antenna in case of the failure of the high-power system. Alternatively, and less expensively, have yourself a reducer at the site so that you could quickly remove the PA output coax and hook up this reducer and then connect the coax directly to the antenna to put your IPA/VS exciter on the air that way. So, Jeff, any other comments you'd like to run through before we go to questions?
I think we've pretty much covered it, Chuck. Thank you.
How about you, Alex?
No, I don't think so. The only other thing I've ever run into was specifically another Harris box, the HT series.
Yeah.
When you connect a VS to the HT series, they have those little controller cards. They have little brains in them, and they always talk back to the IPA. So you have to do a couple more things to talk to those, which I believe Harris has a modification kit for those as well. But that's about it.
Perfect. Thanks for that feedback. So now we have the opportunity to go to your questions, and I have noticed that there are some here. Let's see here. And what changes would be needed for LPFM use? We actually have an LPFM version of the VS300, which has the special filtering which is required to meet the different specifications required for LPFM use. Thank you, Chris. And the PowerPoints won't be available as a PowerPoint. One of the gentlemen was asking to have a hard copy of what we've presented. It won't be available as a PowerPoint. However, we're going to be able to present this entire webinar. Will be recorded and put up for playback probably within the next 24 hours or so. Thank you for that. That's from a customer in Indonesia. And let's see. There's a question about when there might be another boosters webinar and SFN webinar. It's already up there as a stored webinar. I'll show you the link to that in a second. And let's see here. Have we tested the VS series for transient intermodulation distortion and SID? I'm not familiar with SID. TIM has been tested, and the performance is what you would expect for a digital exciter. But good question. I will check on the SID part. Is the interlock jumper the same thing as a mute, or is a mute separate set of pins?
They're the same pins.
It's the same pins, just another terminology for the same pins. So thank you all for your questions. Getting to where you can find more information, I mentioned the Waves newsletter. You can sign up at http://www.nautel.com/newsletter. All the webinars are stored. All the ones we've done for the last several years are stored, and you can download or watch them online as you so choose at the webinars section on our website. We also have a YouTube website where there are typically some cut-down versions of these webinars available. We also have a Facebook site with lots of cool news going on all the time. And then there's the Nautel store where you can purchase literally every part in our inventory and get pricing 24/7, 365, and even VS transmitters.
You can buy a VS300 or a VS1, even a VS2.5 there.
And please do like us on Facebook. Fiona will be ever so happy that I said that.
That's right.
So if there are questions, feel free to email us at sales@nautel.com. But for now, we've used the 30-some-odd minutes we said we were going to use. So for Jeff Welton and myself, I'm Chuck Kelly, thanking you ever so much, and have yourself a good day.